Part 2. The Quran and Motivation for Science. The motivation for scientific endeavor is another important subject of our inquiry. In this part of the book, we will investigate the relationship of such a motivation to the content of the Quran. Since the scientific endeavor is a rigorous form of intellectual activity, it requires motivation. Scientific work is typically not performed to satisfy such basic needs as eating, drinking, or sleeping. Since satisfying these basic needs is clearly a powerful motivator, their absence makes one wonder about the rationale for spending so much time, effort, and resources for an action that is seemingly not related to any fundamental need. While salaries, reputation, social status, and titles can motivate the doing of science, these motivations can be equally reached through other, less demanding and more rewarding professions. For example, business, sports, and politics can provide more fame and money than scientific professions. These sources of motivation are not particular to science, and although they enable scientific endeavor, they don't adequately explain science as opposed to, say, business. And while scientific work can satisfy certain practical and technological needs, such practically oriented motivations don't apply disciplines dealing with fundamental questions, such as cosmology, which deals with the past and beginning of the universe. Such utility-centered motivations would explain various disciplines, such as engineering, and they also lead to viewing the fundamental sciences only as tools for facing engineering challenges. Since the Quran endorses the sheer wonder of knowing the world, it can adequately motivate science at every level. By affirming observing the universe as a mandate from God, it motivates science as a means of recognizing the might and art of God. Ibn Rushd, the famous Muslim philosopher of the 12th century, pointed out that studying nature helps better understand God, and he claimed that it is mandatory to work on philosophy. The word philosophy is used broadly, including the meaning we use for science today, thereby expressing his motivation for philosophy science. They witness the existence of God only through learning about his creations. In addition, only when the content of beings is well known, the knowledge about God becomes complete. If investigation of beings is recommended and encouraged in religion, it is obvious that whatever philosophy indicates is a must or recommended in terms of that religion. It is crystal clear that in the verses of the Book of God, the Almighty, religion invites to evaluate the beings through reason. Such a motivation provides the required drive, even in the absence of any other worldly opportunities. Furthermore, as opposed to the pragmatic motives, this motivation cannot be satisfied by any other discipline. It is particular to science as the struggle to understand the universe. It also motivates fields where science cannot be utilized as tools for practical benefits and worldly satisfactions. In an ideal Muslim society, in which the Quranic teaching to study the universe is well understood, scientific endeavor is inevitable. In the worldview presented by the Quran, science is an inevitable part of the effort to understand the universe in the most sophisticated possible way. Furthermore, our God-created intrinsic curiosity can also be a source of motivation. As Aristotle says, all men by nature desire to know. The desire to know is a distinctive aspect of our God-created human nature. This desire is common to all humans, theist, atheist, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, or Jew. Although this intrinsic desire to know could also be a source of motivation, it does not constitute a rational ground for spending the astonishing time and resources required for scientific endeavors. Desires, it should be noted, can conflict with reason. For example, an intrinsic desire can push a person to eat dessert, but if he is obese or diabetic, he should not follow this desire. In certain cases, it is rational not to follow a desire. The Quran on the other hand, motivates by presenting a rational basis. While satisfying desires is an important aspect of human nature, finding rationales and mental satisfaction are also a part of this nature. By offering rational motivations, the Quran satisfies our intellectual nature. Hundreds of verses of the Quran invite us to explore the phenomena in the universe and to draw conclusions from them. None of the other major religions offer such an incentive. For a devout Muslim, obeying God's commands and struggling to comprehend God through nature is the strongest source of motivation. Such a rational motivation supports the commitment required for studying the universe, even in the absence of worldly benefits such as money, reputation, and title. If this incentive is followed, it will lead to scientific works, to perform these works, and to acquire the knowledge emerging thereby. Al-Biruni, 973 to 1048, one of the leading scientists of his time, said, Verse 191 of the Surah Ali Imran is the reason why I studied science. The translation of this verse reads, They remember God while standing, sitting, and on their sides, and they reflect upon the creation of the heavens and the earth. Our Lord, you did not create all this in vain. Be you glorified. Save us from the retribution of hell. Many other verses in the Quran lead to study the phenomena in the universe, including, Say, look at all the signs in the heavens and the earth. All the proofs and all the warnings can never help people who decided to disbelieve. The heavens and the earth are full of proofs for the believers. Also in your creation and the creation of all the animals, there are proofs for people who are certain. Also, the alternation of the night and the day, and the provisions that God sends down from the sky to revive dead lands, and the manipulation of the winds, all these are proofs for people who understand. He is the one who sends down water from the sky. You have something to drink from it, and from it shrubs you use for forage. He grows you crops by means of it, olives, date palms, grapevines, and every sort of fruit. And that is a sign for folk who will think things over. He has regulated night and daylight for you, while the sun, moon, and stars are subjected to his command. In that are signs for folk who use their minds. He is the one who constructed the earth and placed it on mountains and rivers. And from the different kinds of fruits, he made them into pairs, males and females. The night overtakes the day. These are solid proofs for people who think. In the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the alternation of night and day, there are signs for those who possess intelligence. In today's world of scientific specialization, the phenomena of the universe fall within domains of different disciplines, which are likewise affirmed in the Quran. For example, the following verse in the Quran points to astronomy. Have they not looked at the sky above them, and how we constructed it and adorned it without a flaw? This verse is related to geology, and the mountains and how they are constructed, and the earth and how it is built. The following verse is about the origin of life and paleontology. Roam the earth and find out the origin of life, for God will thus initiate the creation in the hereafter. God is omnipotent. This verse is related to archaeology. Have they not roamed the earth and noted the consequences for those who preceded them? They used to be more powerful, more prosperous, and more productive on earth. Their messengers went to them with clear signs. Consequently, God was not the one who wronged them. They are the ones who wronged their own souls. And this verse is related to botany. He is the one who sends down from the sky water whereby we produce all kinds of plants. We produce from the green material multitudes of complex grains, palm trees with hanging clusters, and gardens of grapes, olives, and pomegranates. Fruits that are similar yet dissimilar. Note their fruits as they grow and ripen. These are signs for people who believe. This verse is related to zoology. And in the livestock there is a lesson for you. We provide you with a drink from their bellies. From the midst of digested food and blood, you get pure milk, delicious for the drinkers. This verse draws attention to embryology. O people, if you have any doubt about resurrection, remember that we created you from dust, and subsequently from a tiny drop, which turns into a hanging embryo. Then it becomes a fetus that is given life or deemed lifeless. We thus clarify things for you. We settle in the wombs, whatever we will for a predetermined period. We then bring you out as infants. Then you reach maturity. While some of you die young, others live to the worst age, only to find out that no more knowledge can be attained beyond a certain limit. Also, you look at a land that is dead. Then as soon as we shower it with water, it vibrates with life and grows all kinds of beautiful plants. Most Muslims read these verses without grasping their meaning. While the Quran is the most widely read and memorized book in the world, grasping its meaning typically loses out in the struggle for reading and memorization. Nobel laureate Abdus Salam, who received the prize in 1979 for his contributions to the unification of electromagnetic force and the weak force, criticized Muslims for not abiding by those verses of the Quran and ignoring science. The Quran emphasizes the superiority of the alim, the man possessed of knowledge and insight, asking, how can those not possessing these attributes ever be equal of those who do? 750 verses of the Quran, almost 1/8 of the book, exhort believers to study nature, to reflect, to make the best use of reason in their search for the ultimate, and to make the acquiring of knowledge and scientific comprehension part of the community's life. During his Nobel lecture, Abdus Salam recited the Quran as a symbol of his philosophy on science and religion. The verses he recited were, He created 7 heavens in layers. You do not see any imperfection in the creation by the Most Gracious. Keep looking. Do you see any flaw? Look again and again. Your eyes will come back stumped and conquered. Getting to know the universe is also a means of getting to know the Creator, which can likewise motivate all theists. From this perspective, Islam is on par with the 2 other monotheist religions, Judaism and Christianity. Numerous members of these religions expressed their motivations for studying the universe as contemplating the might and art of the Creator. For example, some Christian thinkers state that God has written 2 books, Holy Scripture and the universe. Both books, they argue, are sources of knowledge about the existence and attributes of God. Moreover, many Christian scientists were motivated by such religious beliefs. Newton, for example, said, God is known from his works. Of other major thinkers of the scientific revolution, Del Rach argues, since the cosmos was a creation of God and represented God's own work, it was worth studying. In fact, some Christians saw investigation of the creation as itself having religious significance, learning to appreciate what God has done. And they saw scientific work itself as a type of religious obedience to God. Muslim thinker and mathematician Khwarizmi, 8th to 9th century, known as the father of algebra, introduced the modern number system and the number 0 to the Western world. Khwarizmi conceived of his scientific studies as a form of worship. That fondness for science, that affability and condescension which God shows to the learned, that promptitude with which He protects and supports them in the elucidation of obscurities and in the removal of difficulties, has encouraged me to compose a short work on calculating by Al-Jabr and Al-Muqabala, confining it to what is easiest and most useful in arithmetic. The majority of the theist thinkers of today reject God of the gaps arguments, which stem from our ignorance. Those who support God of the gaps and similar arguments assert the existence of God through the gaps in our knowledge about the universe. Arguments like, "We do not perfectly understand how the heart works, so it must be created by God," or "We do not know how the stars produce their light, so God made the stars," are examples of God of the gaps type arguments. The main flaw of the God of the gaps approach is that every scientific achievement explains something previously unknown, hence fills a gap and dispenses the necessity to refer to God for that gap. It is almost as if this stance glorifies ignorance rather than comprehending the universe. Few contemporary theistic thinkers adopt the God of the gaps as a supporting argument for the existence of God. Seeking God in gaps contradicts with the spirit of theism. For a theist, God is not an entity that appears solely in gaps. He is present and in action everywhere in the universe at every time. He has a mark beyond every phenomenon in nature. The Quran supports approaches based on knowledge rather than ignorance. Studying the universe broadens our understanding about the stars, our world, life, and so on, which in turn supports knowledge of God. Aiming to develop such an understanding also provides motivation for scientific work. Ibn Rushd, the famous Muslim philosopher of the 12th century, pointed out that the action of studying nature helps better understand God, and he claimed that it is mandatory to work on philosophy. The word philosophy is used broadly, including the meaning we use for science today, thereby expressing his motivation for philosophy science. They witness the existence of God only through learning about His creations. In addition, only when the content of beings is well known, the knowledge about God becomes complete. If investigation of beings is recommended and encouraged in religion, it is obvious that whatever philosophy indicates is a must or recommended in terms of that religion. It is crystal clear that in the verses of the Book of God, the Almighty, religion invites to evaluate the beings through reason. The Quran likewise encourages the sharing of knowledge. Those who seek scientific knowledge for the sake of wealth and reputation are likely to keep discoveries to themselves. Throughout history, there are many examples of knowledge passed from master to apprentice and deliberately hidden from others. For this reason, some skills stayed within the monopoly of small isolated groups. It is not hard to guess that part of the accumulated knowledge was lost before being transferred to new generations, or part of it had to be reinvented. For example, the manufacturing and contents of the famous Greek fire of the Byzantines is still not completely understood. Likewise, the well-known Damascus steel and countless other antique products of craftsmanship are being tried to be reversed engineered in modern times, without complete success. It is likely that the lack of knowledge on how the great pyramids of Egypt were constructed is due to a similar loss. On the other hand, for those who try to reach knowledge with the motivation of following the orders of God and understanding His might and art, it would be meaningless to try to hide the knowledge. On the contrary, this type of motivation supports dissemination of knowledge and not leaving it to the monopoly of a small group. Of course, dissemination of scientific knowledge can also be achieved through other motivations. Yet it is important to mark that the motivation provided by the Quran supports this critical process. Historically, scientific knowledge was produced by people of many different beliefs, including Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and atheists. In order to benefit from the cumulative and incremental nature of scientific knowledge, one should be open to obtain knowledge from all beliefs and avoid being capricious. Notably, as the Quran guides to study the phenomena in the universe, it does not contain any implication of such a capricious view. To the contrary, the Quran criticizes racism and nationalism and forms a mental structure which disregards race, skin, color, gender, and family differences, but regards universal values and truth above them. This attitude rejects diminishing other nations or races or religions and staying away from their knowledge. Consider the following verses of the Quran. O people, we created you from the same male and female, and rendered you distinct peoples and tribes, that you may recognize one another. The best among you in the sight of God is the most righteous. God is omniscient, cognizant. Among his proofs are the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the variations in your languages and your colors. In these, there are signs for the knowledgeable. From the perspective of the Quran, the universe and the nations are creations of the one God, and hence, the truth is universal. It cannot change from one society to another. The Quran equally rejects both the polytheist systems of the past, which accepted distinct gods for each society, and the postmodern philosophies of our time, which reject the existence of universal truths. According to the Quran, universal truths and realities exist. Hence, whichever society reaches them, the nature of these truths stays unchanged. Thus, the truths discovered by other nations are valuable since they concern the same universe created by the one God. The Quran unequivocally opposes the fanatical thought of rejecting everything that comes from other societies. Such fanatical thoughts can be better appreciated by considering the infamous track record of many spokesmen of Islam. Islam al-Kindi, an early Islamic philosopher, 9th century, describes such spokesmen as merchants of religion. He summarizes the proper Muslim attitude toward the knowledge stemming from other beliefs. We ought not to be embarrassed of appreciating the truth and of obtaining it wherever it comes from, even if it comes from races distant and nations different from us. Nothing should be dearer to the seeker of truth than the truth itself, and there is no deterioration of the truth, nor belittling either of one who speaks it or conveys it. In addition to motivating science, the Quran demands morally the application of knowledge to the welfare of mankind without doing damage to nature, God's creation. The relation between scientific activity and the ethics built by the Quran could be a whole chapter by itself. For brevity, we touch upon this issue only in relation to the motivation given by the Quran. Knowledge is a kind of power, and the use of this power without any ethical bounds can be devastating. Staying on the side of the good and the right, opposing the bad and the wrong, protecting the weak without expectation of benefit are fundamental Quranic principles. These principles are important in all aspects of life, including the use of scientific knowledge. The benefits of medical knowledge to the weak and poor are evident. On the other hand, respecting the environment is equally valuable, since the damage we do to the environment harms both ourselves and future generations. The Quran warns of the dire consequences of human actions. Disasters have spread throughout the land and sea because of what the people have committed. He thus lets them taste the consequences of some of their works, that they may return to the right works. In the Quran, the phenomena in the universe are presented as verses, evidences of God, and the mentality that God is the real owner of the universe is developed. For a Muslim, the verses of God are valuable, treating them vulgarly, doing harm on other people, and the posterity by doing damage on the nature is against the feeling of responsibility developed in the Quran. One who regards nature through the mind constructed by the Quran and the system of ethics developed by it should refrain from doing damage on nature. In brief, the Quran's directive, investigate the universe as a way to understand the might and art of God, provides ample motivation for science to a degree that is unseen in any other major religion. Along with this motivation, the Quran also encourages the sharing and dissemination of knowledge and endorses learning from other nations and beliefs. Finally, the Quran never sets ethical considerations aside and supports protecting the environment.